Philosophy, the ancient world, before 250 BCE. Thinking is the talking of the soul with itself. The world of forms and knowledge, Plato's theory. Plato is known as one of the greatest students of Socrates. Actually, most of the things we know about Socrates come from what Plato wrote about him. However, as the good student he was, Plato didn't only learn from his mentor, but he also developed his ideas in new directions. There are mainly two opinions of Socrates that influence Plato's own theory. One is that moral concepts such as good or justice should be absolute and not relative. The second one is that in order to reach those two concepts, we need to reflect on them. For example, in order to be fair, we should start by asking ourselves what fairness is. Plato agreed with this and firmly believed that if we use reason, we can reach the true definitions of these concepts. But the true question for him was, how is this possible? How do we know that we are actually able to reach them? To understand it, let's first take a look at what happens with easier concepts. You see, in a garden, we can find a huge variety of plants of different colors, sizes, and shapes. However, we classify them all as plants. The same thing happens when we observe a single plant throughout time. Although it changes and looks different at each stage of life, at all times we know that it is the same plant. Plato believed that for this to be possible, we must have in our minds an ideal reference of what a plant is. In other words, we must recognize its essence. When our mind compares the ideal reference with the object in front of us, then we recognize the object for what it is. The most precise examples of this statement are found in mathematics. Thanks to logic, we know that the area of a triangle is equal to its base times height divided by 2. Or we can also prove that the Pythagorean theorem is always true in a right triangle. However, in the real world, there are no perfect geometric figures. The triangles we are talking about when using these formulas are only ideal, but not real. It is true that using tools such as the ruler and the compass, we can draw very well-defined figures, but there will always be slight imperfections. However, those mathematical formulas are still true. This is an example of how we can reach knowledge using reason without relying on our senses. And here comes the most original thesis proposed by Plato. There is an ideal world of forms. There we can find the essence of everything we know. In this world, there is the perfect right triangle and the perfect plant, although they exist as forms, not as objects. But one question remains. What about the concepts of good and justice? Are they also part of this world? Well, although we cannot perceive them as such here on earth, we can recognize them. After all, when we say that an action is fair or unfair, it's because we know that the essence of fairness exists. This means that in this world of forms, we can also find the true forms of justice, beauty, goodness, and other concepts that are usually so hard for us to define. We cannot perceive this world with our senses, but we can reach it through reason. To better understand this idea, Plato designed the so-called myth of the cave, and it goes something like this. Let's imagine there are some people who have been trapped in a cave for as long as they can remember. Behind them, there is a wall that blocks their way out, and behind that wall, there are other free people around the fire. Due to the light from the fire, the objects that the free people have are reflected as shadows on the wall. The trapped people have never seen anything from the outside world except those shadows. That is, when they think of an object, they do not think about the real object, but about the silhouette. If one of the trapped people managed to climb the wall and take a look at the world outside, that person would probably be overwhelmed by the light and confused to find out that they had been deceived their whole lives. This is exactly how Plato believes that the world of forms works. We live in a material world that tries to imitate the perfect forms that exist in that world. However, nothing in this world is quite equal to the form it imitates. Still, if we use reason, we can perceive a little bit of that world of forms. It may be confusing at first, but only then we can reach the truth. This way, Plato was in favor of what we now call rationalism, a theory which believes that we cannot entirely trust our senses, since they can easily be deceived, and, instead, we must turn to reason as a trustworthy means to reach knowledge. Another conclusion reached by Plato is that humans are also divided into two parts. On the one hand, there is our material body that gives us our senses and belongs to the world around us, but on the other hand, there is our soul that gives us reason and belongs to the world of forms. According to Plato, the human soul normally lives in the world of forms, but when we are born, it becomes temporarily contained within a body that keeps it tied to the material world. That is why reason allows us to access the forms. After all, according to this theory, our soul already knew all of the forms before our birth, and the only thing it has to do to find them is to remember them every time we see them represented in the material world. Likewise, Plato believes that our soul wants to return to the world of forms, so according to Plato, after death we would return directly there. While in this world everything is temporary, changing, and imperfect, in the world of forms everything is eternal, stable, and perfect. Plato considered that the task of philosophers was to discover the true nature of the forms, and that only that way could true justice and true virtue be reached. For this reason, Plato was of the opinion that philosophers should be the ones who ruled the cities, since only they would be able to truly understand the moral values. Although Plato's theories were very innovative, it is also true that they were not accepted by everyone. In fact, among his greatest critics was one of his best students, Aristotle. But even so, Plato is considered one of the best and first philosophers of Europe, and his thoughts influenced other thinkers for many centuries. We can easily forgive a child who is afraid of the dark. The real tragedy of life is when men are afraid of the light.
If you enjoyed the explanation we presented in this video, we invite you to discover some more of our content produced by Canic Time. In case there's any doubt, clarification, or topic proposal, we remain at your service. Please feel free to leave your comments, like the video, and subscribe.